As a case study, we are going to create the printing an invoice program that we have discussed so far and put into together, and we are going to apply object-oriented design paradigm. Again, this example is in the programming level object-oriented design, not in much higher abstract that software engineering typically deals with. That part of the concept we are going to learn after this lecture. So we have a development process. Very first step is we get requirements, and then out of the requirements we identify classes, and then for each class we find responsibilities and its collaborators. So we are going to use a CRC cards to formulate it, and then we find the relationships between and among classes, and the final product is a UML diagram on this step. And then number 4, we do documentation using Java doc utility, and then finally write code. So requirement gathering, task is print out invoice, and then we want to have an invoice that describes the charges for a set of products in a certain quantity, and then we don't want to deal with too much in detail, so let's omit those complexities such as dates, taxes, and the customer number and so on. But we want to print a billing address and all line items and the amount due, and then each line item has a description and unit price and the number of items ordered and the total total for that. And then we want to write the test code for that. So this is what we are looking for. So invoice has a customer's address, and each line item we have a description, price, quantity, and total, and then finally we have amount due. So first step is from the gathered requirements, which is problem description. We identify classes by looking for nouns. Here are the list of possible nouns, invoice, address, and so on up to due. But we are not going to design a class for each of those nouns. So we need to do some further processing is as follows. We analyze those relationship between those classes very briefly. For example, description is more like a product property or attribute, so it will be an instance variable member for product class. Similarly, price. The quantity is not an attribute of a product. The total is computed, amount due is computed, and so on. So by doing such quick analysis, we can reduce those number of classes. So finally, suppose that we have 4 classes identified, and then they are going to implement it in classes. So invoice, address, line item, and product. Then using CRC card, we identify responsibilities and the collaborators. Of course, before we do this one, which is not listed in this PowerPoint, is that we may find some common things between 2 classes or among many classes, and factor them out to create an abstract class which is common superclass of those things. So we are going to do those things before implementing each class out of this identified nouns. Suppose we have done such and we don't find any abstract class which is common things between 2 or 3 or more classes, then we now create CRC cards. So invoice, first responsibilities, it should format the invoice, of course, and for address, it should format the address as well. And then we find a collaborator for invoice class. So to format the invoice, we need address class. Address class holds the information about the actual address. And then in invoice, we are going to put line items in a list or table, so we need a collaboration from line item. So to do format the invoice, we identify the two collaborators for that. For product behavior or responsibilities, we need to get description of the product and get the unit price of the product. So those two responsibilities are listed, and then no collaborators required. It could be done by self. And then for each line item, to format it, we need a collaboration from product. The get total price is computed without any other collaborators. And then another responsibility is that for invoices that we should be able to add a product and the quantity, which becomes a new line item, and we need a collaboration from line item class. Also from product, we need a collaboration from product. So finally, we identified the relationship as follows. The invoice has a address. Also, invoice has a line item. The line item has a product. And then invoice uses a product to produce a invoice printed. So that's the relationships we found so far. So out of this, we are going to actually create or implement the classes. So in this diagram, we see that address is owned by invoice. So address is not dependent upon any other things. It's a self-standing. Like product is a self-standing as well. Product is not dependent upon invoice, but invoice is dependent upon product. So address, product, those two classes are not dependent upon any other things, so self-standing. So let's take a look at those two, address and product first. So if I go back, address responsibility is format the address, so that should be implemented in address class. So in address class holds those information: name, street, city, state, and zip as information about the address, and then the responsibility needed for this class as identified from CRC card is formatted. So we are going to format address as follows. And then product, if you look into the CRC card, it has two responsibilities: get description and the get unit price. So product has a description, price, and then two responsibilities: get description and get price is now implemented. And then line item owns a product. Then CRC card says line item has two responsibilities: format the item with a collaboration from product class and the get total price. So code for line item owns a product and two responsibility: get total price. Collaborator is a product. The format collaborator is a product as well. So those are implemented based on UML diagram and then the CRC card. So finally, we have an invoice which owns an address as well as a line item and then uses a product. So invoice owns an address and line item and then uses a product to add. And then to format, it uses a address which is owned by itself, and then uses a line item which is owned by Invoice. So the whole relationship and then responsibilities of each from CRC card is now implemented in program, and then you are going to document it. Then the Java has a very convenient documentation means it's using Java doc, so we have learned this one in earlier lecture, so let me skip that part. And then finally all those are implemented now, so those ones are the one I showed you from NetBeans directly. So when all of those are done, you will actually write application code for that. So application for that is Invoice printer. So using this application, and then out of all those classes defined, identified, and implemented, then you can print the actual invoice. So here, self-check question: which class is responsible for computing the amount due? What are collaborators? So invoice is responsible, as we identified from CRC, and then it needs collaboration from LineItem class. So why do the format methods return string objects instead of directly printing? It's a dependency. System.out is a print stream object, though, so to minimize the dependency, just return the string object. And then also by doing so, you can use this code if console IO is not available.